Hey guys, welcome to the Big Ten Week 6. We're halfway there, halfway done with the Big Ten season already. Big Ten Week 6 preview of the Five-Star Zone. I'm Rico Beard. That's Harold Sheldon from the Big Ten Network, joining me like he always does every week. And Harold, coming into this week maybe not so salacious as it was last weekend, where you had the Oregon Ducks in the whiteout at Penn State, and for a game that started off that looked like it was going to be just Oregon, looked like it was going to be James Franklin doing the James Franklin. I switch over, Alabama, Georgia, come back, and I'm like, whoa, we got a game here. Goes to overtime, and look, I got into an argument. Drew Allen, the pick that he threw in the overtime, I'm like, man, I think that was just a hell of a play by the linebacker. I mean, anytime you leap up like that and just kind of snatch it out of midair, nobody can game plan for that. But Oregon goes on, wins. Ohio State, Washington. If you're going to run a trick play, you may want to get everybody on the same page.
Yeah.
Now, I'll say this. When Washington ran the fake field goal, had they thrown it to somebody else, that tight end was blocking like his ass off. Nobody was getting past him except they were throwing the ball to him. So, yeah. So, interesting week. Now we come up to this week. This week matchups, not as big time as last week. So, let's just kind of talk about a few of these. I guess the most interesting one is Washington going to bounce back from losing Ohio State, going up against an undefeated Maryland team. Is this Maryland team like the biggest kept secret in the Big Ten right now?
They certainly could be. And, we've seen this from Maryland in the past. They've always been good in September. They're always good in non-conference play. And then you get into conference play, October, November, they start to struggle. But I wonder if this year's a little different just because the defense has been so much better. Right now they're tied for the National League in sacks per game with Tennessee and Oklahoma. Granted, the competition hasn't been great, but it wasn't great a year ago, and they didn't play this level of defense. So, I think there is an upgrade there. I really like Malik Washington at quarterback. I think he throws one of the best deep balls in the Big Ten. It's probably him and Dante Moore at this point, just in terms of the accuracy and the downfield throws. So I'm curious to see what that looks like. Obviously, Washington needs a bounce back. We know how dynamic the offense is, and we talked it up, all week. And Then Ohio State put it in the closet. So
I don't know if they put it in the closet or Harold. It kind of seemed like to me the moment was just too big for them. Like they had every opportunity, and every time they got it close to the end zone, they shrunk. And they stopped being Washington, and they stopped being aggressive, and they just kind of played Ohio State's game. And Ohio State was like, okay, thank you. If you're going to make it this easy for us, then great. Moving the ball between the 20s, they looked like, okay, that's Washington. But the closer they got to the end zone, you could just feel the tightness. Like they were more afraid they were trying not to lose instead of winning the game. They were so afraid of making a mistake rather than just going out there, getting the job done, and beating the number one team. It was like too much pressure was on them. I don't know. That's just how I interpreted that.
And I mean, they definitely shot themselves in the foot. There was a lot of penalties early in that first half. They get down to the 3-yard line and then they commit a false start or a illegal formation. You had Jed Fish getting the penalty. So there were several times where it looked like they had chances to score. And if they get a touchdown early there, maybe it changes things. But when you pretty much, I won't say control the first half, but you were doing what you wanted to on offense for the most part, and you're only up 3-0, like that's a really bad sign. And then Ohio State got going, and once Ohio State got a lead, they were able to send that pass rush, and Demond Williams couldn't do anything. So I do think Washington had a lot of opportunities early, and once they didn't capitalize on those, the better team just wound up winning out.
Yeah, because I'm looking at Ohio State. I don't feel like they're the best team in the nation. They're sitting there at number one, but I think that's number one by default because they beat Texas early on, and we were all, seduced by Arch Manning. And then we found out later that Arch Manning, he ain't Arch Manning. Seen this movie before. I mean, heck, Yeah. Look, you would be better off, and I didn't think I would ever say this. You'd be better off trying to tell me about Bryce Underwood and Arch Manning. Arch Manning just looks like he wishes to God his last name wasn't Manning and he wouldn't have all this pressure. But I look at Ohio State. I guess their biggest test will be Penn State, November 1st, and then the season finale at Michigan. So, I mean, they got Illinois. I lost how I felt about Illinois. I mean, they bounced back this week.
They did.
What Indiana did, it was personal. That was. I'm sorry, Illinois fans out there, but after what I saw what Indiana did to you, I have a hard time seeing the bounce back. And no, we're good now. Are you though? I don't know. I mean, impressive win last week, but I don't know. That's just me. I mean, you handled USC. You came back. You did what you had to do. Allmeyer drove down. I mean, he's a good pressure quarterback when the chips are down. You kick the walk-off field goal. But, yeah. And on a side note, maybe I'm old school. Harold, I like it when I see the fans rush the field after you win a walk-off touchdown or walk-off field goal. I think that's college. I mean, yeah. I wish every school did that. I really do. I mean, I think Michigan did it when they beat Ohio State for like that first time in a long time. Mm-hmm. And you saw it was like 100,000 people on the field. Like, that's a cool photo to say I was there. I just wish that I understand the players' safety and you got to get them off the field. But I think 99.9% of the people are just there to celebrate. Of course, you're going to have the one jerk who wants to pull out his phone and tell you how bad you suck, even though he has no athletic ability whatsoever. But I just like that. I digress. I look at what was I going with this? I was talking about Illinois, right?
Yeah, Illinois, yeah.
So you got Illinois, and like I said, that Ohio State will have that game against Illinois. I just don't know if that's going to be a big enough marquee game for that. For Illinois. But if they upset the Buckeyes, I think then now you're back in the conversation. But when I look at Ohio State, I don't know, because that offense struggles. It's not the same type of Ohio State offense I'm used to seeing, where it became wide receiver U, where they would just have all types of running backs and offensive line, and they were a machine. It kind of reminds me a lot of Alabama, where you're living a lot off your name, not necessarily what you're doing this year.
So I do think Ohio State's defense has been really good. I agree on the offensive.
Matt Patricia.
Yeah, how about yeah, I know I had PTSD from the Lions days of Matt Patricia, but he's certainly done a really good job down there. And I think the fact that they have dudes who are upperclassmen who are able to process all of the information, all of the different looks, they confuse a lot of people. And that defensive line is making a ton of plays, and we wondered how it would look with no Jack Sawyer, with no Tuamoloau, losing all, no Tyleik Williams, losing all of those guys, and they're picking up right where they left off. The fact that you had the two Cadens, Caden Curry, Caden McDonald, they combined for 18 tackles, 5 sacks, and 8 tackles for loss just last week alone against Washington. Goes to show me, like, okay, they still got dudes down there that could perform. And it's kind of a defense-led team, which you don't really think of with a Ryan Day program, because like you said, it's usually, quarterback throwing the 2 or 3 NFL receivers and handing to an NFL running back or 2. And they still have some of that talent out there, but it seems like they're kind of bringing Julian Sand along a lot slower. Like last week, they only had 7 drives the whole game. Like, it was very much a possession. Right. We're going to take 10 plays, 11 plays. It wasn't the quick 2-3 play, 80-yard touchdown in a minute. So it is a different kind of offense. We'll see if it continues that way. I think after Illinois, there isn't really much in the way until Penn State. So I wonder if we'll start seeing some more of those, 40, 50-point games from the Buckeyes that we're used to seeing.
Yeah, like I said, it's cool, but I kind of wanted to see them just really flex. I just haven't – the defense, yes. Offense just leaves a little bit to lacking. 2 local teams here in Michigan. You got Michigan State coming off the bye. Nebraska coming off the bye. I don't know when the last time you had two teams coming off a bye playing each other. You know, Matt Rule talks about his running back depth room and like, hey, I like Matt Rule because he just kind of tells it like it is. Like,
Yes.
look, and I'm not gonna give you coach speak. You know, we paying these players and it's semi-pro type of thing. I can respect that. He's like, maybe we just spend the money where we should have like other teams. You got Michigan State and Jonathan Smith coming off a loss late night. They lost some defensive players. Looked like they got some back, but now they lost another person in Stan Ramil on the offensive line. What do you expect? Because for me, this is kind of, okay, you lost. If you're MSU, you lost at USC. Here's your chance to kind of go on the road, right the ship, and become a serious contender to maybe get to 8 wins. If you win this game, I think maybe there's a path there. It'll be difficult. But if you lose this one, it's like, okay, well, when is the next time you're going to beat a quality opponent? Because that's the biggest thing for Jonathan Smith is you don't have that signature victory yet. You could say it's Boston College, but then you later find out Boston College is not that great. So,
Right.
Could this be that game where if you go out to Lincoln and you beat them, that's what it is? And it's kind of like for Matt Rule as well. Like you really don't have that signature victory yet. Both teams coming with quarterbacks that are young, almost like a little bit of a Spider-Man meme here.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see that. I think it's a much bigger game for Nebraska. Just coming off the Michigan game, everybody was kind of wondering if this would be the year where you turn it around and you become the Nebraska that we've known for, from the 90s and the 80s, and you're back in the playoff conversation. And then you lose that game, and then you got 2 weeks to stew in it. And it's like, okay, is this the same on Nebraska? How do they respond? And if you look at their schedule, there's only one ranked team left, and it's at Penn State. It's a game you probably won't win, but if you win the games leading up to that, you could still find yourself in the top 25, and you're in that conversation because at that point they could be 9-1 potentially. The next 5 games being
right.
Michigan State, at Maryland, at Minnesota, Northwestern, USC. It's favored in most of those, I would say. So this is a chance to at least, kind of get the ship back in the right direction. As for Michigan State, you're right that they don't really have a win to hang their hat on in the Jonathan Smith era. So this would be a nice one to get. I know they're a pretty significant underdog, which I was a little surprised to see, but you kind of need this one.
Why do you think that? Because when it came out, I guess, look, I know Vegas doesn't win games and they don't lose games. They just try to set the bar and try to make money. I actually expected to see maybe like Nebraska favored by a touchdown. I wasn't expecting the double digits. I was like, wow, I guess is nobody putting money on Michigan State, or if they really just feel like Michigan State can't go on the road to win this thing?
Yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest. I think it could just be the way that the teams have looked. Nebraska, I think quarterback-wise, probably slight edge there. I think their secondary is certainly better than Michigan State's. The home team,
right.
Obviously they get points there. But, yeah, I was a little surprised to see it be as high as it was. But I will say, I think 6 of the last 7 matchups have been, less than a touchdown. Well, I mean, we've seen some crazy ones. I should say 6 of the last 7 have been decided by 5 points or fewer. We saw Jaden Reed punt return. We've seen the crazy play in Nebraska where the receiver was out of bounds and came back in and caught it and upset Michigan State in 2015. We saw Harlan Barnett get his only Big Ten win a few years ago. But we've seen some crazy games, and that was against Matt Rule. So we've seen some crazy games in this series. Yeah. Now, who knows how much carryover that actually has, but these teams do play a lot of really close games. And we know Nebraska hasn't been good in close games. So if it winds up being close, then maybe all of the pressure is on Nebraska to make some plays to pull this game out. And, the way Aiden Childs has been playing, I think they certainly have a shot to win that game.
You just finished talking about Aiden Childs. If you're Aiden Childs, I've seen him play a lot better this year, cutting down on the turnovers. Going on the road, he really won that USC game. Is this a game where he could kind of make that statement and really turn into a coming out party?
I think so, because the Big Ten has a lot of good quarterbacks this year, and you always hear, Dante Moore, you hear Julian Sand, you hear Fernando Mendoza, you hear Bryce Underwood. I mean, you even hear Nico, Damon Williams, Raiola. Like, you hear all these guys, but you don't really hear Aiden Childs. And Aiden Childs, I'd argue, is probably the most important to all of it, just because of the deficiencies elsewhere. So if he's able to go on the road, put up a good game against a really good Nebraska secondary, and you're like, okay, like he's continuing to put it together. He's continued to stack good game after good game. Because last year, we'd see the Iowa performance, and then he'd follow that up with 150 yards and a touchdown and a pick. But this year, he's put the BC game with the Youngstown game. And even in the loss to USC, he was still good. He threw for 3, ran for 1, and had about 250 total. So I think he's playing really well, and he's really under the radar just because Michigan State just hasn't had the success that other teams have had so far.
Now, if you're Michigan State losing to yet another offensive lineman, I mean, does this put more pressure on Aiden to kind of, scramble and put the team on his back and just try to, because I don't know if this is how this is going to affect that run game. So does he become de facto, that third running back?
So, yeah, I definitely think they'll still use him in the run game. But I know Ramil missed the second half of that USC game, and I thought Rustin Young actually came in and played pretty well. First couple snaps, it was like, whoa, got to get used to the speed here. But I think once he settled in, I didn't really notice him after that, which I think is a good thing, for a guy who barely played last year and I think is, still just a freshman. So, knowing that he's had 2 weeks to prepare, we'll see how he holds up. I mean, the Nebraska defense has not been good against the run. So it would be disappointing if Michigan State couldn't run on them. We saw what Michigan was able to do, and even Cincinnati was able to run for 200 against them. So this is a defense that.
Well, it's funny you say that, because when I see that, it was like 11.5 point, I'm thinking, well, the one thing that MSU can do if you allow them is run the ball, so they can shorten the game that way. Is it more an indictment that they just don't feel like the MSU defense can shut down Raiola and that Nebraska offense?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. And, we saw Raiola play pretty well. Even though he got sacked a ton against Michigan, he was still able to make a ton of plays. He still threw for 3 touchdowns. He threw for 300 yards. So you figure if he's got even more time to throw, those receivers can get open and make plays. I know we talked a couple weeks ago when they played Michigan, and I thought that their skill players were actually better than Michigan's. And, Ja'Cory Barney's a really good player. He had a couple touchdowns, went over 100 yards receiving. I like Emmett Johnson as a running back. He's kind of a dual threat in terms of a rusher and a receiver. So, I do think that there'll be plays to be made. And, with them being at home, them having a better defense, I guess that all adds up to the number that we saw.
Let's talk about the other team in the state of Michigan. They went to Nebraska. They got the victory. They got a bye week, and now they get a Wisconsin team that, Harold, I think is kind of teetering. I never know what Wisconsin is, and it just in my world, they've lost their identity for some years now. When I want to see Wisconsin football, I look at Illinois, because that's Wisconsin football from back in the day. They've tried to be all types of different things, and it kind of reminds me of the cat in high school who, 1 week he wants to be a goth, and the next week he wants to be a prep, and then he wants to be a jock, and then he wants to be a skateboarder. And he doesn't really have an identity. He's just kind of finding something as he goes along. This Wisconsin team, I don't see Luke Fickell's days being long there unless they can pull off a major victory, a major upset to get the fan base off their back.
Yeah, he's certainly struggled there for sure, trying to figure out how they can get this back on track. And the problem is their schedule is, it's ridiculously hard. This is just the start of it. If you look at what they've got to end the season, after this game, you host Iowa, you host Ohio State, you go to Oregon, you host Washington, you're at Indiana, you host Illinois. It's already been pretty bad up there. Just trying to figure out how they can right the ship. And they've been snake bitten by QB injuries each year he was there. He brought in a transfer. He winds up getting hurt. So they've had to start a backup the last 2 years, and then they bring in Billy Edwards. He gets hurt in camp. Then he gets hurt again in the first game against Miami, Ohio. Now they're playing the backup again. So even though he struggled, he hasn't had the deck that he thought he would have. And but to your point, overall, it's certainly an identity problem. Like, we know Wisconsin is a lineup, blow you off the ball. We're going to run for 200. Doesn't matter who we have back there at running back. And you think of all the great ones they had, from Melvin Gordon to Jonathan Taylor to Monty Ball and Corey Clement and all of those guys.
Right.
And right now, like, they don't really have a lead back. They don't have a back they can trust. They don't have an offensive line that can blow people off the ball. I think when I saw them play Maryland a couple of weeks ago, it was like, whoa, like, they can't line up and run the ball against Maryland. Like, all of their most successful runs were jet sweeps to receivers, or is it the QB keeper? Like, they couldn't just line up and blow Maryland off the ball, which was just shocking to see, knowing what we know about Wisconsin for 30 years. So I know they tried to get back to it, hiring Jeff Grimes. You know, he was a run first guy when he was at Kansas, and, you know, they had a good offense, but I think it's going to take time. And, you know, unfortunately with this schedule, there's really no landing spot to try to get a win, because, I mean, as we talked about, at home against Iowa or at home against Washington are probably your most gettable games. And those are going to be really hard to get.
Right, because it's Michigan, a noon kickoff, and it's just like Michigan coming off that victory in Nebraska. You got to feel the confidence in Bryce Underwood. They didn't ask him to do a ton. He did enough. They're leaning on the running backs, the tag team running backs they have, to really kind of eat up the clock. The design quarterback run play was brilliant. Now Sharon Moore is back. Do you think they just keep this as is, or do you see a new wrinkle in this offense? Because the defense, look, I think we all know that this is Wink has them just blitz, and then when you come back to the bench, blitz each other. That's all they do, is they just blitz. They bring the pressure. They force you to make mistakes.
Yep.
They force you to look at, you know, you're not going to get a chance to look at 4 different reads. You may get 1, 2 at the most, and then you got to make a decision like that. But offensively, should we expect to see anything different now that Sharon Moore is off of his 2-game suspension?
I'd like to see more from the receivers, and, you know,
the receivers would like to see more from the receivers.
This is true. This is fair. I know right now, you know, they lead the Big Ten in drop percentage, so that's obviously been a huge issue. We know the run game is coming along. The first time we saw them play a big time opponent was Oklahoma. Bryce didn't run at all. They had the one run from Justice Haynes, and that was about it. And so then you saw it a little bit more against Central Michigan, and then you really saw it against Nebraska, where they basically had 3 guys who were able to take one the distance at any given point, which makes them really, really dangerous and kind of makes up for the lack of receivers. I have a hard time seeing Wisconsin being able to stop this run defense. This run game. I do think their run defense is the best part of their defense, and the secondary isn't as strong, but that's not Michigan's strength either. So I do wonder if it takes a little while, you know, is it a slog early? Is it punts back and forth? And then Wisconsin's just on the field so long because they can't move the ball that they eventually just get worn down. I think that's kind of what happened against Maryland. We saw it against Alabama, too, where it was close for about a quarter and a half, 2 quarters, and then the talent just won out in the end. I feel like that's kind of what happens on Saturday, too.
And it's funny because when you look at the Michigan run game, I mean, I'm wondering, like, is it Haynes or is it more the run game? Because he'll get stopped, and then he blows one for 75 yards, and the stats will look like, wow, they rushed for this amount, but really they didn't. They got contained, and then whatever they say at halftime at Michigan, I wish they would say at halftime in the MSU locker room. because the first play of the second half is just like, okay,
Boom.
guys, it's going to be a 75-yard run. Either it's going to be to the left or to the right. We'll flip a coin, but we're going to score. And that's kind of when they kind of put teams away for the last couple of weeks. I mean, they didn't put Oklahoma away, but it was like they jumped back into the game like, okay, just when you thought this thing was over, bang, gone for a touchdown. I mean, it's because when I look at him, it reminds me he's just one of those guys that I don't think the Michigan offensive line is that great, but he's just very talented. It reminds me a lot of Kenneth Walker when he was at Michigan State. We had a ton of yards, but when you really broke it down, it was a lot him. Or like Barry Sanders back in the day, it was a lot more him and less of the O-line. Like there's certain schools, like you said, Ohio State would always have an O-line no matter who you put back there. Wisconsin, we just finished talking about it. They would always have a bunch of offensive linemen, and you could just plug and play, and they would. I'm still on the fence of whether it's the Michigan offensive line or whether it's just the running backs are very, 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 very talented, or maybe both things are true.
I think it's more running backs being talented than Michigan's offensive line being good. Just because, to your point, they've been hit at the line almost 45% of the time when they carry the ball, which is, bottom 5 or 6 in the conference. But they are top 5 or 6 in terms of yards after contact per attempt, in terms of broken tackles. And, it's almost like the Barry Sanders thing where, you bottle him up and he's getting 2, 3, -3, 1, 2, 80. And it feels like Michigan is very similar in that, where it seems like you got the run game bottled up, and then all of a sudden they hit you for 75, and it's just a complete backbreaker because it seems like all of the work that you did to limit Michigan all of a sudden is out of the window. Then they get a lead, they get confidence, they send their defense back out there to rush the quarterback, and then the snowball starts rolling downhill for an opponent. So I do think it's a little bit of both, but I do think it's more of Michigan's running backs being talented. And now that you have Marshall to go with Haynes, it makes them really, really tough to stop.
All right, now the other game on that's coming up this weekend, it's an interesting Vegas number. It's Illinois at Purdue, but it's Illinois only favored by 10 points. Purdue, I guess it's not Purdue from last year, but I figured Illinois being ranked, I thought that number should be bigger. Why is that? What are we looking at here? Is it something we don't know?
So I will say Purdue is very interesting in that you don't know what play is coming. It feels very Jeff Brom-like in that way, where you think it's one thing and it winds up being another. There's all kind of trick plays that they run. We saw it against Notre Dame where it looked like Devin Mockabee was going to carry the ball, and then he stops and throws it to the quarterback, and then he runs for a touchdown. So we've already seen, Ryan Brown, a Purdue quarterback, have a receiving touchdown. He's run for a touchdown. So they try to confuse people as much as possible, which I think is really good when you don't have the talent that other teams do. And last year was kind of like the first time we saw Ryan Brown when they played Illinois, and Illinois was up big. Purdue came all the way back, actually took the lead, sent the game to overtime. This was in Champaign, and they needed a 2-point conversion to stop to win 50-49, which was just in a really, really crazy game a year ago. And then I wonder just mentally, how does Illinois respond? This is a perfect sandwich game. You come off the big win against SC, emotional, had to have it after what happened against Indiana. You got Ohio State coming up the following week, big noon, back in the house for that. And now you got this noon kick on the road. Could be a sleepy environment. We'll see. And, Illinois, I will say this. When the chips are down and it's a close game and you have to have it, Luke Altmaier more often than not has delivered.
Yes.
In the last 3 years, no team has won more games decided by 8 points or fewer than Illinois. They won 11, and that's since he's been there. So I think he has a lot of confidence. The team kind of thrives off of that, knowing like, hey, we need to drive. Luke's going to, go down and get us a win. And there's something to be said for that, because there's not a lot of quarterbacks that have that kind of experience when the chips are down, and he's done it time and time again.
Okay. All right, so Harold, what you got for us, man? What's that stat of the week? We all wait.
So I will say, I know we talked a lot about the Michigan running backs, and we talked about Justice Haynes. I think it's interesting to note that he's got 537 yards already. I know we talk a lot about Jonah Coleman being the best back, and I do think he is, but Haynes is certainly in that conversation. And now those 537 yards are the most by a Michigan running back through 4 games since Mike Hart in 2007. So they've had some really good ones. They've had the Blake Corums and Donovan Edwards, and he's outperforming all of them through the first 4 games. You got to go back, almost 20 years to find a running back that's had this hot of a start in the Michigan uniform.
Yeah, and the funny thing is you say you could bottle him up all game long, and the second you sleep on one play, it's 80 yards to the house. Because once he breaks and gets to that second level, you could already see it's just a matter of time before he scores that touchdown. So, All right. Good stat. All right, now, next week when we come back, we say it's going to be a better class of games, and we could end up having some great games this weekend. Like, man, didn't see that double overtime game coming. But, no, we'll be back next week. It'll be some games that at least Vegas will think will be closer in matchups.
Oh, for sure. And then, if you think about last week, all 6 games were expected to be single-digit spreads. And what do we get? 5 out of 6 were 6 points or fewer. Yeah. So next week you get Ohio State, Illinois, you get Michigan, USC, you get Indiana, Oregon. We got some really good games next week.
Yeah, that is. I think by next week we'll know who the real big dogs are and who the pretenders are, who are in that second tier, not quite in behind that velvet rope in the VIP section. But we'll figure that out next week. But for now, for Harold Shelton, I'm Rico Beard. Thanks for watching the 5 Star Zone. We'll be back next week, guys.